name's James Compton with James Compton Customs. I'm going to do another little video for you guys today. We're going to be installing our Billet clutch pressure plate and our Billet alternator chain tensioner lockout. We built these little lockouts because if you've been around the ZRX world for very long, you've probably heard the buzz about that being a weak link in this motor, which has very few, but that is one. The stock tensioning unit, the bow can actually back up and hit the clutch pressure plate as it's turning and the basket. Almost every motor we've been inside, we've seen evidence that this has been happening. I've only had one come in that had completely blown up the clutch basket because the tensioner bow had backed up and caught it so hard that it just disintegrated everything, broke the number 4 piston cylinder sleeve, and really tore some things up. It was definitely a catastrophic engine failure. So the reason for the tensioner, it's just a small little piece that goes in the stock unit, replaces the little lockout unit that's in there now. I'll show you how that goes in. It's just a little billet block and a pin with an E-clip. We also are going to be installing our Billet clutch pressure plate. It's aircraft grade aluminum billet. It's a stronger, little lighter than the stock unit, but to be honest with you, there's really not a whole lot of performance advantage. We just wanted to offer something as a replacement to putting your old beat up clutch pressure plate back in. And the real reason it came about is I have some customers that run the clear clutch cover so you can actually see the pressure plate, and they wanted an upgrade, something that looked a little nicer. And so that's how it came about. But anyway, we're gonna dig into this today, and it's a pretty quick and easy upgrade. If you're working on your bike at home and you don't want to drain the oil, you want to put it on the side stand, you can pull this cover and you shouldn't lose any oil. If you are working it on stands and it's straight up and down, you will need to drain the oil out. Otherwise, when you pull this cover, you're going to have a big mess on your hands. So the first thing we're going to do is pull this cover off, and so we can get to these parts. This cover doesn't have dowel pins, that's why I was kind of holding it on as I took the last couple bolts out. We've had it off recently, and so it's not stuck. If you've run your bike for any length of time at all with the cover installed, it'll kind of be stuck on there. You probably don't have to hold it, but it's always a good idea so it doesn't have to fall on the ground. Probably actually have to take a rubber mallet and give it a little tap to break it free. So this gasket also is brand new. I won't be replacing it because I just put it in while I was building the motor. You can reuse your gasket if it's in good shape, but usually I just go ahead and replace them because they do have a tendency to weep. It's just a good idea. Anytime you take a cover off that's been installed for a while, I would go ahead and replace the gasket. Okay, so here's your stock alternator chain tensioner. And the problem with this tensioner is this bow right here. It's just, the only tension is just spring tension. And I don't know if you can see, but if you look closely, that can back up and slam into your clutch basket, tear everything apart. What happens is on decel, this chain wants to push back and it kicks this assembly back at your clutch basket. And you can even see on this one, it's very mild, but there are little nicks all the way around this outside and even on these webs. So it's just a matter of time before something bad happens. So anyway, we're going to pull this out and use our new block. It's just a modification to the stock alternator chain tensioner. And what it's going to do is it's going to, when we install it here, it basically, the tensioning mechanism can't back up far enough to hit anything. once it's in place. It still uses the stock spring and everything, the internals, to keep the consistent pressure on the chain. And on decel, it will allow it to back up, but only like 100,000ths of an inch. So anyway, and then we're going to replace the stock pressure plate. So you do not have to have this out to do the pressure plate. You do have to remove this to do any other clutch work, even removing the plates. It's nice to have it out of the way, but for what we're doing today, we can go ahead and zip both these pieces out, which I'm going to do right now, and then we'll modify. We'll have to grind this pin and knock it out, take these little pieces out, and then we'll put our new tensioner in. So today we're installing this clutch pressure plate on a clutch that's already been set up with the Kawasaki Concourse slipper clutch modifications. If you're installing our pressure plate on your stock clutch assembly, you'll notice it's a little different. It has a larger diameter hole so you can put your original hat bushing or top hat type assembly in for your throw out. This one's a little different. It has a Torrington bearing and a circlip on the rod itself, on the throwout rod. So now we're just going to remove the two 8mm bolts that hold the alternator chain tensioner in, and we'll pop that out. So the first thing I'm going to put back in is the pressure plate. When you put it in, you're going to have your little throwout bushing goes in first. Then you have your Torrington bearing, goes on the end, and then there's a washer that goes over that. You want to install that. We are not going to use the circlip that was on the original throwout. It's not necessary. And actually some of them have them and some of them don't, depending on which style or which year model of assembly you ended up using to do your slipper clutch mod. And I'm actually putting one back in that does not have the circlip because it's a little shorter and I like it better. The only thing really that you need to be aware of is there are teeth on the back side of the pressure plate that engaged your clutch hub, and you just want to make sure that it's fully seated when you install it. So when you put this in, you want to wiggle it a little bit until it gets fully seated in there. The other thing, if you're doing all this work, at the same time, I would highly recommend putting a set of Barnett clutch springs in. They're about 20 to 30% stiffer than a stock spring, and these motors have so much torque. If you're riding them hard, clutch life can be an issue, and running a stiffer spring really helps. If you're running the slipper clutch setup out of a Concourse, you do need to order the springs for a Kawasaki Concourse from Barnett, the stiffer ones. They're a different length than the ZRX spring. And I'm just going to get all these started. I'm not going to run them all the way in yet. And when you're doing all this, you definitely want to refer to your owner's manual for torque values, all this. So when I install stuff, I do like to use drill motor a lot. It makes things go a lot faster. But when I'm installing this particular drill, you can turn the torque way down on it. So I run it in with a very, very light torque, so it won't even meet the torque specification called out in the book. You don't want to run these things in and end up stripping something out. So you can hear the clutch actually release when it gets snug. So I'm going to go ahead and final torque the clutch plate now, the pressure plate. I've been installing pressure plates on motors for years. I don't even know what the book calls for. I always set these to 7 foot-pounds. Never had an issue, but you should always refer to your manual if you don't know and have a question. Our pressure plate's installed, it's been torqued up, we've checked, everything feels good. So what we need to do now that we've got this out, the only thing we're removing is this pin right here. I like to grind on the outside because it's much thinner and it's easier to get it ground down. And what I do is I just take an angle grinder or a bench grinder. You can take a file if that's all you have and file that down until the head is basically removed and you're flush with this plate. Then you need to take a punch and drive that out. Once you've driven it out, there's a center bushing, this little flapper, and this pin that you no longer need, as well as this spring that holds on to all that assembly. We don't need that stuff anymore, and so you can go ahead and remove that. So I've gone ahead and I ground the head off the stock pin and drove it out with a punch, removed the little dowel assembly. It actually goes through the center of the pin, and the little spring, it must have fallen off the bench, but there's a small spring that hooks in here and keeps tension on this. That's been removed too. So you should have those 4 parts with the spring, and then you'll end up with the rest of the stock assembly like this. And so since you ground on it and did all that, you want to take some contact cleaner or something and clean it, blow it off, make sure it's really good and clean because it's going back inside your motor. You don't want to put any foreign debris in there. And then we're going to go ahead and install our new alternator chain tensioning block. We've got our block, we've got the stock assembly that we've modified and removed the components we don't need anymore. I'm kind of fan this out a little bit so you can see. So we've got the end of the leg of this tensioning spring and the original plunger shaft, and it's going to be critical to align those things. If you notice, there's a little slot on the side of this body. That's where we want the leg of this spring to go, and then the hole through the center of it, that's where we want the plunger to go. So we're going to put that on there. We got to kind of slide this together, and we just got to make sure that that spring goes in that slot. It kind of has a tendency to hang up. You got to just push it over to the one side, and there it goes. So this thing is designed, it's pretty it goes in there, it's pretty snug. So on most of them, what I do is I just take a rubber mallet, give it a couple taps on the back, and then we're lined up and ready to go. So there's a register on the part that lines up on the billet block that lines up with the plates, and so when it's fully seated, it's pretty nice. It's, you know, it's one of those deals. There are other tensioner blocks available. We just wanted something that was a little more finished, so that's why we developed this one. So when you receive your alternator chain tensioning kit, with the block, you're going to get the pin and an E-clip. You want to run this E-clip in from the outside of the body and just pop it through, and then your groove is exposed, and you want to put this E-clip on. I'm going to warn you right now, this E-clip, I've shot many of these across the shop. You got to be really careful when you put that on. It's really easy to get away from you, and if it does, they are available at the hardware store. As a matter of fact, I'm probably going to start putting an extra one in each kit because they are cheap. Just because chances are you'll send one across the shop like I do sometimes. Okay, so I'm going to put that clip on, and then we're going to put that back in, and we'll call it a day. So I took my gloves off for this so I had better feel, but the way I like to install these is I just get the leading edge of the clip going into the groove. So what I like to do is use a small set of needle nose pliers to push this into the clip groove. just like that. So once I've got this clip installed, just as a precaution, I like to put a tiny little bit of high temp RTV on the clip itself, like on the back side of the body, away from the opening of the clip. I just smear a little RTV on it, and that way it just ensures that it's going to stay in place. So now once you've got our assembly is back together, what we can do is you can use one of your stock cover bolts. There's a threaded orifice on the side here. You can retract the plunger all the way, thread that in, just snug it up. It doesn't have to be super tight. Now what that does is it's retract the plunger, and it'll be much easier to install now. And if you've ever installed one of these with the stock retaining mechanism, you know what a pain in the butt it is, because it doesn't work very good. So I'm going to get those started. Once again, refer to your owner's manual for the torque on these. Once you've got these torqued, you can go ahead and pull that set screw back out. You see it just snapped up. And so now when our chain tries to kick this back, it hits the body and it can't get into your clutch basket or your pressure plate. So disaster averted, and it looks good. So anyway, and not that anybody will probably ever see it unless you run a clear clutch cover. But anyway, now all you need to do is install a new gasket, put your cover back on, make sure if you drained your oil, you put oil back in it, and you're ready to go. Hopefully this video has been informative. If you're interested in any of these parts, they are all available on our website. If you have any questions, please keep those coming, and we will continue making some videos. We appreciate you and hope you have a great day.